Okay, let's get going. Welcome, everyone. This is OAUTH. Let's get going. A not well, a reminder that not well applies. This governs everything that we do at the IETF. So please be respectful, be professional, and make sure to read more about this because this is important for IPR related stuff beyond the behavior that we expect from everyone here, right? Tips, please make sure that you log into the data tracker. That helps us kind of evaluate how many people show up to those meetings and plan for future meetings. It will also help you kind of get into the queue and ask questions if you need to. For remote participants, please make sure that audio and video are off and use headset, please, if you can. And if you speak up, please make sure to state your name. Okay, quick update on from the working group. So we have the first party app is waiting for the we've done the work group last call and we're waiting for the Shepherd write-up. So that's going to happen after Vienna. Transactions token or transaction tokens will start, I think, a third work group last call. Is that, Peter, is that correct? Yeah, okay. So hopefully we'll start that after Vienna. Another document that is really important and we would like to make progress on it and we haven't been doing much on that document is OAUTH 2.1. So we are looking for volunteers or people to review it. Yaron here is, there you go. So you want to capture, okay, we have 4 people. So we have Nick, we have Yaron. Okay, perfect. Thank you all. Appreciate that. Aaron, do you want to say anything about this? It's good?
Yes. Hi, Aaron Parecki. Yes, please. All the help with OAuth 2.1 would be appreciated. But I also wanted to update on the browser-based apps draft, which is another one that has been long in progress and is an input into OAuth 2.1. It is in the RFC editor queue now, and I've been working on processing their feedback. So it is, in fact, already has its RFC number assigned, which is very exciting. But yes, it's in the queue. So I'm excited for that one to be
awesome
moving forward as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Aaron. Okay. So I want to talk about the number of requests that we got this time because it was really massive number of requests for presentations. So, and we expect this challenge to stay with us for a year or 2. So we're trying to manage this. We will also discuss this on Friday, but I just want to give you a heads up that we will need to kind of filter lots of those and reject some of those requests just because of the sheer amount of requests that's coming our way. From a church perspective, like it's just impossible to accommodate everyone, right? So if you want a request, if you want something to present, then you need to do a few things to help us kind of get you time on the work group, right? So you need to have discussion on the mailing list, right? So start a thread on the mailing list and engage the working group and the team. You need to show that there are multiple parties interested in this topic. It's not just one person or one party, right? That shows that the community is interested in this work, so we'll prioritize this work, right? And obviously interest from the community to deploy and implement and deploy this work, right? So these are important things that you could do to kind of help us kind of prioritize that work, right? Hani, is there anything else?
No, I just reiterating what you said, like it's important not just to write the document, but also have other people care about the document, because after all, we care about interoperability. We need to have other people convinced that this is actually something useful, because like it's not just a conference where we present stuff. We actually want to make some forward progress. And while many of you do that, you reach out to other companies, you see whether the industry has a problem and that needs to be solved, but not everyone does. And now we see more requests for whatever reason than before. And so, yeah.
Yeah, okay, awesome. Thank you. Anybody has any comments, questions about this topic? This is, again, we will discuss this we'll spend more time on this on Friday. But look, if anybody has any question, comment right now, go to the mic, please. Okay, good. Okay, so we have today's session, and we have still another session tomorrow. So today we have a number of workgroup drafts. So we'll start with Aaron or Brian or both talking about identity assertion JOT authorization grant. Then Aaron will talk about the client ID metadata. I think Pedram will be talking about the security BCP. And Arndt will be talking about the SPIFFE client authentication. So these are the work group drafts that we'll be discussing today. There is one more that we'll discuss on Friday. Individual drafts, Yaroslav, is he here? Yeah, perfect, good. So he's gonna be talking about transaction authorization challenge. So these are the drafts that we're gonna start with. And then we have kind of allocated some time to talk about agent use cases and gaps. Dick will kick us off with OAuth. Mike will be talking about KYAPay. And then Mei-Ling will be talking about agent authorization use cases, gaps analysis. So we'll do those presentations first, and then we'll get all the authors here in the front of the room, and then you can ask questions to any one of them, okay? And have a discussion after that, okay? Good? Any? Okay. And that's our agenda for Friday. We'll talk about that on Friday, okay? Any agenda bashing? We good? Okay. Aaron or Brian? Just let me see if this works. Clicker. Let's try this.
That works.
Yeah.
Great. Hi, Aaron Parecki. First up, identity assertion authorization grant. So I've got a couple of particular points I want to discuss here. So I'm going to go really quickly through the background. So if you're not familiar with it, I'm going to try to set a little bit of the stage, but hopefully enough of you have seen this already. This is a profile of the OAuth identity and authorization chaining draft, which is now submitted to IESG for publication. This profiles the draft further for a more specific use case than that draft. In particular, the idea is to extend the concept of single sign-on into API access that OAuth provides. The two main benefits this provides is reduced user friction, because we can, similar to how single sign-on reduces the number of login pages, single sign-on for API access reduces the number of times you have to approve OAuth consent screens. And in particular, in enterprise environments, it moves that idea of, is this app allowed to do this thing, into the enterprise IDP where the admins want it to be to configure it. It is built on two building blocks, token exchange and the JOT authorization grant. So it is describing the use of these two together to achieve this goal. So basically, the first app that's trying to get access to some API has the user log in through its normal SSO, which could be OpenID Connect or SAML. and then that application exchanges that token for a cross-domain ID JAG for short. That's the Identity JOT Authorization Grant, which is a JOT that I'll talk about in a second, which it then takes and uses in a JOT authorization grant as described in 7523 to get an access token for the resource. This is what the JOT looks like. It is got similar claims to an ID token because it serves a similar purpose, but it also includes specifically the information about which party this it's requesting an access token for, including optional scopes for what part of that account is trying to be accessed. Okay. So what's new since the last time we met? There are a lot of new implementations of this. I am actually super excited about this. A bunch of them are actually live now. There's a bunch still in progress. Some are open source, some are closed source, and it actually spans the entire range of all the different roles involved in the flow. So there's a bunch of new clients. There's quite a lot more resources that support this. There are standalone authorization server products that support this. There's a couple of IDPs, some in progress. And then there's also, really usefully, a bunch of testing tools and blog posts and tutorials explaining how this all comes together and how to use it. Rather than mentioning them all by name on the slide, because I'm sure I would forget a couple, I have put a link to the OAUTH.net page about the spec, where I'm trying to collect links out to those implementations. So if you're curious, you can find them there. But yeah, there's like the big milestone between last time we talked and now is there's just been a ton of community interest in this. So takes me to changes since the last version. Based on the feedback of last time we talked, there's now quite a lot more clarification of terms and background and intro in the spec. In particular, better defining what the name cross-app access refers to versus the name ID JAG and the acronym, or the short name XAA. Based on some of the discussions, the hallway track discussions at the last IETF, it turns out that this is not actually limited to enterprise use cases. That's just how I've been coming at it. But there's actually a couple of use cases that have nothing to do with an enterprise IDP that could apply this as well. So there was nothing that needed to change about the protocol. So it's really just a bunch of the phrasing and descriptions of the roles we've updated so that it's clear that it applies to the trust relationships rather than what they actually are. And then there's a new metadata parameter that helps with discovery on both ends for advertising support for this. Yeah. Yeah, we can take questions before I go on.
No, I can wait until the end.
Okay. One of the other big changes was when the resource app that is trying to be accessed has a SSO relationship that is SAML-based, it is assuming it's going to get SAML-shaped things and values in a SAML SSO, which we needed to reflect in this token that is now being used in place of SSO. So what we did for that was essentially created a JSON structure that represents the same values that you would have in a SAML assertion so that this application can receive the SAML name ID, whatever that might be configured as, which it turns out is wildly all over the place in practice. But this shows up as a new claim in the ID JAG, and this was essentially the blocker for people who were trying to actually build this into products that exist already versus greenfield applications. So with this, it was able to then actually get deployed at a resource server because they can now map users correctly without having to deal with out-of-band mapping of users. So there's a whole section in the spec that talks about how this works and the background for it and how the processing rules about it. So this is in, I would say, decent shape for the current feature set. There's a couple of priorities for things that I would consider to be pretty important next steps for this that it's debatable whether we want to consider them blockers for the draft itself or whether these are extensions, but these are essentially the priorities that are based on, again, what we've been seeing as we were working with everyone who's building this out. the two main priorities are how do we ensure that the users that are showing up at these resource applications can be JIT created, because typically they are when they do SSO, and now they may not have an SSO opportunity to create that user, so they need to be created when this API request comes in. And the second one is how do we do key binding in this ecosystem, where we want to actually make sure that not only the IDJAG, but also the final access token is bound to a proof of possession key, like, for example, using Depop. So those are the two main priorities. I have some slides on some suggestions for them, and I want feedback on the direction of those topics. So first on JIT provisioning, and there is, so technically it already says that custom claims are allowed in the IDJAG, which does enable an IDP to put anything it wants in there that can be useful for the resource. And it would work, but it won't necessarily be interoperable. So the question, and this is a question for the room, is should this actually be described in a way that makes it more interoperable and reusable? There's an open issue, 83, that talks about a particular mechanism, and again, we can pursue that mechanism or look for something else, but that mechanism essentially adds a negotiation step to the flow, where if the resource AS receives a token that doesn't have enough claims to create a user, it can respond with a challenge that says, I need these claims. And then the client can include those claims in the token exchange request so that the new IDJAG created will contain those claims. There's a lot of things that are not described by this mechanism, like, is it okay for this to happen? Things like that. That's all I would consider out of band, like internal policy. So this is really just the minimal on the wire protocol to make this work. The one thing this does is it would mean that the client doesn't have to always ask for these claims, and the claims don't always have to be included, which is generally beneficial for security considerations and other things. But like, it's debatable whether how important that is in this context. Possibly in non-enterprise context, it's a little bit more important, but it's debatable. So the question is really, do other people agree with this as a priority to solve either in this draft or as an extension, or is it better just sort of left to fend for themselves in an ecosystem? And I will, since we have a queue building up, I will invite some discussion on this before I go to the second topic.
Some people are saying that they have some issues with your mic. I'm not sure. Do you want to try?
Check.
Do I need to just speak even closer?
Is that better, Emilia? Okay. Let's.
Okay.
Okay. Good. Okay. Yaron.
Hello, Yaron Zahavi. I think it's a very good draft, and I really like the architecture layering in the sense that the IDP has a connection to the user and within its organization can reach out to it for approvals or other parties that need to approve. I gave this feedback a couple of days ago on the mailing list, but maybe it was not seen yet, but Carl engaged with it. And this is when you include support for authorization details. I think you need some more metadata here for the client to know what to request, because those are remote authorization details of the resource AS. So how are they structured, what to request for the IDP to enforce from, first of all, an interoperability point of view. Are these the right authorization details that can be processed by the resource AS? And the moment that you do some importing and setup by an administrator of authorization details, that's the place to put governance. Like, you're trying to talk to Atlassian as the resource AS. If the user is going to ask for delete rights of tickets, whoa, then I want to trigger these policies, otherwise other policies. So I think metadata, which I'm going to talk about tomorrow, really fits in and supports this. And Carl is engaged and the discussion goes on there. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. It's good. Okay, Justin.
Hi, Justin Richer. So this is more of a sort of, document presentation and structure as opposed to the technical content. Because this document uses two very similar looking processes, JOT assertion grants and token exchange, some people, as late as this morning, got backwards when they were explaining to somebody else which one is used where. Please help me. I genuinely, I keep forgetting which one is used first and which one is used second. To me, I don't have a good intuition for why they are in that order.
Yep.
I know that that's covered in the cross-domain draft better.
I can give you the short version.
I would love the short version in the document.
Yep.
And honestly, having the diagram labeled as to which one you're doing where would go a long way to helping that as well.
Yes, excellent point.
But yes.
Okay.
If you have the short version now, that's great also, but
The short version is the second request that actually gets the access token is conceptually an authorization grant, because that's the result of an authorization grant is an access token.
Mm-hmm.
So that uses the JOT authorization grant spec.
But you can get that out of a token exchange too.
You can, but you don't. That's not necessarily the outcome of a token exchange.
Yeah, but if you ask for one.
So
we don't need to debate this here, but that but it's
debate's
exactly
already happened.
That type of pathing that
the debate has already happened in the identity chaining draft.
Totally
but I will
that, and I accept that that's the structure. I'm asking for more help to remember and understand that structure with the document as it moves forward. I do think this is great work and very needed.
Okay, thanks. Art.
Yeah, I have a bit little context. I did not see the issue, but you have 3 different authorization services at play, right?
Two.
And the enterprise one, or like IDP?
The IDP and the resource authorization server.
Okay. And they may have different understanding of the claims. How do you solve that?
So, well, this is, so similar to scope, they would have to have the same understanding of claims. So the scopes are resource defined. These claims would be resource AS defined. And yes, the enterprise IDP needs to be aware of both in order to do anything useful with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. It's just a constraint. Yeah.
Okay, Max, keep it quick.
Max Gerber, I just wanted to say that the JIT provisioning is a problem for us. We get a certain set of claims back with an ID token that we use to create the user. And if we don't get the same set of claims through this flow, then we're missing information we'd otherwise have.
Okay. I see Paul in the queue. Quickly, please. I've closed the queue, so pay attention to the queue, guys.
Hi, I'm Paul, work on Anthropic and work on Model Context Protocol. I wanted to say we adopted this with Model Context Protocol. It's been super useful. And then the 2 pieces that would be helpful for us is, which we've already talked about a bit on the issues, is the more granular error codes when you have invalid grant, because you can't tell if it's the, if the user doesn't have a seat, or if you've messed up the token. And then the second one is if we could mention it somewhere in there, the corporate personal crossover account linkage, that would be super useful, so that when people are implementing it, they know that they have the option to disable the authorization code flow on their normal flow. Is like a really good prevention there.
Yep.
Okay. Do you want to introduce the other topic?
Let me introduce the other topic. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to throw 2 new drafts at you in this one slide. We've been looking at the key binding story end to end for this, and it's already solved in a couple of places, but there's gaps in other parts of the flow. So there's 2 new documents that talk about how to solve those for the steps where it's not yet defined in the spec. One is the token exchange step. You technically can do it, but you can't tell that it's happened unless you add a CNF claim to the response of the token exchange. So that's that draft. And the other one, which I mentioned, I think last meeting or the meeting before, was the JOT depump grant, where if we're using a bound JOT as an authorization grant, technically it's not a bearer JOT anymore. So we kind of need to say it's a bound JOT. So that is described in this other link. I'm planning on just pursuing these and eventually bringing them back to the working group with more detail, but I wanted to point people at these because these are the gaps that we've found for actually making the end-to-end key binding all the way through actually possible. those are what it looks like. The end. Okay.
Okay. Anybody has any questions, comments about this? Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, and I appreciate that. So my question is that since the client is identified client before it register, how does the authorization server establish trust, especially with the first URL?
So I didn't mention most of the background that I've talked about in previous IETF meetings, but this all assumes that there are pre-established relationships between the parties. However, you could also add CIMD into the picture to establish the client at an authorization server at either of the legs. But that's kind of out of band. It's not part of this protocol. It's just assumed to have already happened in some other way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Peter Kasselman, fantastic to see the key binding work. We did a lot of soul searching on this in the original identity chaining draft. Something that I'd say might be helpful is to be very clear about what do you mean by end-to-end binding, whose keys, because there are multiple folks involved or multiple parties involved. And yeah, having that clearly written out will help you fill out this matrix very nicely and cleanly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is only talking about the client key, like the client's access token, and the client binding from the SSO all the way through the access token.
And it assumes that it is the same client all the time.
It does.
You want to write that down.
Yeah.
Tony, quickly.
Yeah, Tony Nadlin. What do you do with a SAML name ID unspecified?
Sorry, what was the question?
What do you do with a SAML ID, or SAML name ID that's unspecified? You know, there's a parameter for unspecified.
That just means the format is unspecified.
Right.
We
What
just
do you? I
through.
totally understand that. What are you going to do with it?
So it's basically there is no string transformation done with the values that are in the SAML assertion. It's just representing the SAML XML name ID in JSON. So it's says it's unspecified. Here is a value, just the same as it would have in SAML in XML. Yeah.
Okay. Any last minute? Anything else for now?
Nope. Yeah, those are the two main things, priorities that I want to tackle on this.
Okay.
Again, feedback on whether these make sense as an extension or in this document is welcome. So
Awesome. Yeah. And feedback on the mailing list also great, right?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Aaron. Are you presenting the next one? Okay. Okay, I need to take the clicker from you first, which is annoying. So let's yeah, but I need every time I need to take away the clicker and then after yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Great. All right. Hi, me again. Client ID metadata document. This is on draft number 2. First, very briefly, what this is the idea that a client can publish its metadata at a URL instead of it being pre-registered or provided in a dynamic client registration request. It uses the same registry as DCR. And then that URL that hosts this document is used as a client ID in any part of the OAuth flows that require a client ID. Why? Because sometimes it's not possible to pre-register clients. This is very common in cases where you have either open source apps that are going to be talking to arbitrary servers that are configured by people who are not the client developer. So things like WordPress installs or Mastodon or now MCP clients, where the MCP client does not, the developer of that client does not pre-register client IDs at every MCP server it's going to talk to. So this is really enables this more open ecosystem of using OAuth clients with servers that didn't know about it before. This is what's new since last time we talked. Justin, thank you for the review. Justin sent a very long review into the list. It was very helpful. Thank you. Lots of editorial clarifications made it a lot easier to read, I hope. One of the big changes that was a good suggestion was split the idea of what is in this document from how to fetch the document. So that those are now separate top-level sections. I think they were kind of munged together somewhere else before. So great. The whole idea of the using this for development environments, which have some different considerations where you can you have to relax some things that you would otherwise check for in production. That's all now moved into an appendix and is non-normative. And in particular, that the exception for avoiding checking for SSRF for localhost things is really only applicable for dev and testing when you know you're running your AS on localhost also. So really mostly just editorial and cleanup, but yes, thank you, Justin, for the review. There are still a handful of open issues, and again, I wanted to point out a couple here for discussion, but I've kind of grouped them into related concepts. One of them is this ISS parameter. So in last IETF, we agreed that in OAuth 2.1, the authorization server is required to send the ISS parameter, and that enables clients that support it to check for it, and that's used to prevent certain mix-up attacks. I'm not getting into the mix-up attack description because it's very complicated. However, that attack can be solved in two ways. One is the ISS parameter, and one is using distinct redirect URIs per AS that the client talks to. As you can imagine, a spec that is designed for clients to talk to arbitrary servers is likely to talk to more than one AS. It is unlikely that it will ever talk to only one. So this mix-up attack is more prevalent here compared to other places in the OAuth ecosystem. So the proposal here is basically copy OAuth 2.1, even though this is not a direct extension of 2.1, and also require ASs that support this spec to return the ISS parameter, because it is more likely that those clients will encounter this, this attack possibility using CIMD anywhere. So it's hopefully not a huge, it's not a huge burden on the AS, and again, it's meant to be just provide the tools for the client to protect itself. How many slides do I have? I have a couple. This is part of a larger story, which is about how clients can represent themselves to different authorization servers. I do think this is useful regardless of the other things I'm about to discuss. But any discussions on this, any strong opinions one way or the other about adding this requirement? I see Amelia in the queue.
Yeah, Amelia, I think, was waiting for the end of the discussion. I don't know if they have a comment about this specific topic. Amelia, do you want to speak about this?
Yeah, I can give what I just said in chat, which is the other protection mechanism that we have here. Sorry, I think I'm getting looped back. The other protection mechanism that we have here is that we are essentially considering requiring like a .json extension in the URL of the SIMD. And by having that in the URL, you essentially avoid the issuer mix-up attack entirely, because you won't have an issuer string that is .json at the end, essentially.
I think that's a different
I think
attack
that's
you're
where they're
talking
tied in.
about. I think you're talking about a different attack there.
There were two attacks with similar mechanisms.
Okay. Okay.
Justin, you wanted to say something? You good? Okay. Okay.
Okay, so this one is stems from the same underlying problem, but essentially the what's happened in practice as people have been deploying this is that a client has found that certain authorization servers have certain quirks to them, and it needs to modify things in the client ID doc based on what server it's talking to. So this is if the client can only host a single copy of the document, then it doesn't have the opportunity to change anything about what's in the metadata, right? Or it would have to use different URLs for different authorization servers, which isn't really practical. So the suggestion here is basically enable the authorization server to tell the client about itself when fetching the document so that the client has the opportunity to vary the metadata. I'm not tied to this particular method. So the client ID URL, again, just to be clear, is the same URL, but when the AS fetches it, it would include either a query string parameter or it could put in the header the AS issuer, but basically identify itself somehow to the client when fetching. This enables a couple of things. Again, one which has another slide, which is updating client behavior per AS. So if a client wants to change, like add client auth, for example, a client's not doing client auth today, wants to start doing client auth tomorrow, but it knows that this particular server is going to fail if it even says it has the option of doing client auth, then it needs to serve a particular document to that server. So this basically allows us to do this either progressive rollout of updates, slight variations per server, and enables the other option of solving the mix-up attack, which is distinct redirect URLs per AS, which it can use this way. Because again, the other option is using distinct client IDs per AS, which is a worse option. So thoughts on this? Again, the mechanism of query string I'm not tied to, but any thoughts?
Justin Richer, this is very clever and I hate it. And I think it feels like this is like the best of the worst options kind of thing. I can absolutely see the reasoning that leads to this. One of the reasons that I don't like it is that it basically starts to create an enumeration attack against the client's configurations if any of that information should be seen as sensitive, which it shouldn't be because it's a public URL. Totally get that, but you know somebody's going to put something dumb in there. So if this gets added, I think it needs to have a very robust security considerations and privacy considerations of what you do in here, and you know what it means to put information in this document that like this obfuscation is not actually like any kind of privacy. Assume that issuers are guessable. Like all of that is addressable. It is a minor foot gun is what I'm.
And I think actually to your point there, I think that's enough of an argument to me to make this be a header rather than a query string, because then at least I can't share a link to it.
Yeah, it makes it less phishable, which is great. Yeah, and yeah.
Nick Watson here. So yeah, I mean, I definitely support doing this. Again, I'm also not specifically tied to the mechanism, but we live in a sadly impure world and stuff is going to diverge over time, and building in this flexibility from day zero is very helpful. I think it will avoid lots of problems down the road like we have today with AS metadata. Also, shout out to my draft in the mailing list. So yeah, definitely support doing something like this. I agree with Justin. Yes, don't put sensitive information in. It is a mini foot gun. I think it's we have sort of, it's sort of, you know, it's the lesser of two evils, I think, in this case. Otherwise, you're going to end up with people coming up with their own solutions for non-interoperability. I'll also add, because I've seen this in discussion, that like just change your client ID doesn't work for lots of other reasons. Like you'll, in many cases, invalidate all your existing grants. Like authorization servers are going to be like new client ID, who dis. So that stuff like that isn't going to work to version.
Okay. Thanks. Emilia?
So I would probably err against having a query parameter for this, but I would be in favor of having a header for this. The reason why I'd err against the query parameter is because it would potentially need us to, like at the moment, a client ID URL can contain query parameters. It's discouraged, but they can happen. And the reason why we do this is because the entire URL of the client ID URL is the client identity. So if that was to change, then we'd have to, like, if we add in this ISS parameter, then we'd essentially have to strip that parameter out of the URL, which changes the URL.
Just to be
And
clear, this
then-
is not the client sending the ISS in its outbound.
No,
So
this is the authorization server requesting
Yeah.
it. So if it was reflected back, we'd still have to do some sort of cleanup on that. So I'd be hesitant to use a query parameter, but I would be in favor of using a header. Maybe there is a standard like refer header or something like that that we could use in this place.
happy to switch it to a header. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Paul.
Hi, Paul Carlton. The 2 times that I've wanted to reach for this is when rolling out private key JOT support. 2 alternatives to this that would, I think, also help there would be if you can have multiple token endpoint auth methods in the client ID metadata. And then another one that would be super useful here for the same like progressive rollout situation is if you can authenticate, like check on the status of your like quote unquote registration with the AS with just your client authentication. Because right now, if I want to check if the private key JOT is going to work, I basically have to subject some user to that or get an account myself to go through the flow. I can't check if it's going to work ahead of time.
Okay, thanks. Arn?
Yeah, 2 things. So what Emilia said, I think that's very valid because I don't want the authorization server to have to like kind of reason much about the client identifier and start cutting things out because that will be a mess, would create a big mess. So +1 on the header. The other thing is I think we need to clearly describe when to use this compared to a different client identifier. Right, to kind of have clear rules, only use this if you want to use it for credit rollouts and all sorts of things, and when to not use it, because otherwise, yeah. Thank you.
I know I got in after the queue closed. Sorry, I'll be quick.
No worries, yeah.
This does scare me a bit, to be honest, when people talk about using it for interoperability reasons. There's better ways to achieve interoperability, probably, than adding a lot of complexity to a system and making it more difficult to debug. And some of the cases people are talking about, like having private key JOT roll out progressively, are things that are already solved in the Federation spec with some of the extensions there. So we should push people in that direction for those kind of problems, I think. Yeah. So when I say, so I wasn't suggesting using Federation, I was suggesting using the extensions that are in Federation, like being able to specify multiple token endpoint auth methods in the client ID metadata. That's a much better solution than trying to customize it per authorization server. For
I didn't put it in the slides because it's already, as far as I'm concerned, solved. There's a GitHub thread about the token endpoint auth method specifically that now says, oh, there's an OpenID spec that adds a property that has a list of methods supported. Yes, we're going to use that. They should also put it into the DCI registry, which it isn't yet.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about, we don't have time for a discussion on this, but I wanted to, this is also somewhat complicated. There's multiple different solutions to this, but I wanted to set the stage for the problem. This is a problem that multiple people have told me that they need a solution to, so it feels like it's critical to get this right early. Yeah. Essentially, it's again related to the other things I talked about, but it's specifically about actually versioning the metadata document itself. There's different ways to solve it, so we can talk about that on the list or on the couple of GitHub threads that are open, but essentially the options are either doing things like, how do we take multiple different URLs and link them together into the concept of a client, so that if the AS doesn't want to revoke consents, it doesn't have to, or you somehow need to be able to there's different ways to address it. I can't go into it all here. Some of it's on the slide. Yeah. Please chime in on the GitHub threads or the mailing list about the client version problem.
And maybe also you send them a mail to the list and list those problems or issues, open issues, let them reply to this.
I can definitely do that.
And just then very quickly.
Super quick software version that's already in there doesn't solve this?
It does, but we need additional language to describe how to use it.
How to use it for the, okay,
Yes.
yep, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks. Okay. Let's take this away. Metadata, Pedram, yeah, okay. Let me hand you that. Okay, can you control the slides from your side? Yeah, perfect.
Yes, that works.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. We want to briefly talk about the status of the security BCP updates that Tim, Kai-Juan, Adonis, and I are working on. And we also have some discussion points. To give an overview, the current draft covers 4 attacks. We added the last attack pretty recently, which I will describe briefly in a moment. But before that, let me give a brief overview on the first 3 attacks. So the first attack that we describe in the document are audience injection attacks, which have been or are currently being mitigated for different specifications. For example, also in the 7523 BIS document. And our goal was not only to document the attack as part of the security BCP, but also to give a more detailed description of the attack, provide additional countermeasures, and also discuss some implementation considerations. The second attack is a variant of the mix-up attack called cross-toolkit OAuth account takeover. And the usual defense against AS mix-ups uses the issuer identifier of the AS, either in the ISS value of the authorization response or by the client using different redirect URIs for different issuers. But in some ecosystems, the issuer identifier might not be available. And in the updates to the BCP, we describe an alternative defense. And then the third attack that we describe in the document is called cross-user OAuth session fixation. Now, session fixation is a known kind of attack, and in the OAuth space, this goes back to even OAuth 1.0. And the security BCP does describe mitigations for some kinds of session fixation attacks, but in some settings, these mitigations are not enough, especially when the user agent session is not directly available to the client. For example, if the actual client is the backend of a native app, as in the backend for front-end pattern. Yeah, we also describe the attack and also provide countermeasures. Now, as I said, we added a new attack to the updates, which was contributed to by Louis Janet from the University of Bochum. And this attack can happen in brokered OAuth deployments. And yeah, we show the setting here. So we have a broker that mediates between the so-called downstream clients and one or more upstream authorization servers. And towards the upstream AS, the broker is just a normal OAuth client. And the broker can, for example, be an authorization server towards the downstream clients. Now, the problem is that when the end user wants to authorize one of the downstream clients, they will actually authorize the broker. So the user consent is based on the client ID of the broker and not on the individual clients. And the upstream AS cannot even distinguish between the different downstream clients of one broker, which means that all the downstream clients and even malicious ones would get access to the resources of the user. And yeah, this setting has also been observed in practice, and in the current draft, we also describe countermeasures. Yeah, so there are 2 things that we would like to discuss with the working group. One question is what the title of the document should be. Right now, as a working title, that is Updates to OAuth 2.0 Security Best Current Practice. And then the next question is about the RFCs that should be listed as being updated. So definitely 7521 to 23 should be listed because of audience injection attacks. Maybe also the RFC 9700 because of the updates to the mix-up attacks. Although this is already like part of the security BCP. And yeah, maybe some more RFCs. So before opening the discussion, a quick outlook from our side. The document is stable, and it would be great to get feedback from the working group. And we think the goal should be to go to working group last call as soon as possible. With that being said, thank you very much. And let me go back to the discussion slide again.
Bedram, a question on sort of the new attack that you brought up, because I think it also highlights some of the challenges, namely, strictly speaking, the deployment figure architecture that you just showed with the broker in between isn't really classical OAuth. This is a sort of like a homegrown variant. And so we are not really fixing OAuth. We are, in fact, actually documenting some new deployment model, some new use case where people are doing this. And the question is, of course, should there be a broker in this place to begin with? And I've had that sort of question in, for example, also at the OAuth security workshop when similar presentations were given about other sort of attacks. And I'm not sure how to best deal with this, because it also has an impact on the title of the document and how we frame the discussion and what we recommend to some of the companies sort of modifying OAuth on the fly, and then of course later on regretting that they introduced some bugs in their effort.
Yes, so that's a very good point. I would like to hear some other opinions on that, but that's a very good point. Yes.
Okay, Emilia.
I've seen the broker pattern deployed quite a bit with various success. Perhaps maybe what might be needed is a document that actually describes the broker pattern as a deployment pattern. So like an explainer document or something, not necessarily a security BCP update, but a document that actually describes this broker pattern and describes the common issues that people hit into when deploying this sort of setup. Would that make sense?
Yeah, it makes definitely sense to me, specifically since we had published a couple of other documents, like if I think about the browser-based document, where we essentially, the OAuth in the browser, we essentially recommended, like, you would assume that it talks about, like, how do I run OAuth in JavaScript in the browser itself, but instead it says, no, don't do that. And I think that's, I could envision a similar document for those type of deployments if they indeed are common. Like, of course, the recommendation being whatever.
Justin Richer. So one of the things that I found when I was teaching a lot of like OAuth seminars is that a lot of people miss the fact that all of the things that we name in the OAuth specifications are roles that are played by one or more entities each, and an entity can play multiple roles. And that's where we get into weird stuff where the broker is, as far as the client knows, it's calling, if it's doing OAuth to the broker is the AS, because from the client's perspective, it is. And so being able to say that, yes, an AS can have multiple parts to it, and if that AS is following a particular pattern in its deployment, then these are the considerations around it and stuff like that. That fits very much with the OAuth for in-browser apps specification and how that's organized and how the attacks are described there and stuff like that. So I'd be supportive of something like that, talking more about how different AS deployments are, how they affect that story. Right, because ultimately, at the end of the day, the AS is a role that is not going to be deployed the same way that it was in 2012, when server meant an actual physical computer on a shelf somewhere. We don't have those anymore. We have Jeff Bezos's computers on a shelf somewhere, or a tiny slice of it, and that changes how we view some of these considerations, because it adds additional layers, it adds additional entities without adding additional roles. And so, yeah, I'd be in favor of splitting it something like that. Second bit, and this is to the chairs for our security BCP 9700. Do we have a BCP number assigned to that, or is it just an RFC number today? This is also kind of a question for Deb.
It's a good question.
We do have a BCP number. I'm seeing some nods. Okay.
I thought there was, but we need to look it up. But yeah, +1 on the former point. I think I like the way how you spin that story.
Okay. Deb's interjecting. Oh, okay.
It's BCP 240, and when we did the browser-based draft, we talked about adding it to BCP 140, but the 240, but we decided not to, right?
Yeah.
Okay, something like this seems like it should definitely be in there.
Yeah.
And also to the authors, I would consider updating the JOT security practices docs as well. So the JOT access token doc. Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
All right. Thanks for the feedback.
Arndt here. I'm also seeing this pattern being used more and more in the industry for various reasons, and I believe there's broader thing to it. It doesn't stop at the consent. There's all sorts of every aspect of OAuth plays a role here. So I believe it justifies a separate document. I'm also very interested in it. Yeah.
We'll bring it up in the discussion and figure it out. And thanks for the feedback. And thank you, Bertram, for bringing this up.
You want to use the queue? Can you join the queue?
Did you join the queue? Because otherwise we don't have your name.
Yeah, his name is Rashid Bouzian from Morocco. Thank for your presentation. That I want to clarify is that in your drafts into section 2, you have described the core of the attacks. And this analysis is to have signature of different type of attacks or classification of what?
Sorry, the question was if the goal is to have like different kinds of attacks in there.
The purpose of this analysis of attacks is in order to have signature or what?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
The purpose of analysis of the attacks that is described in your draft.
You mean what the goal of the attacks is? So the goal of the attacks are all described.
No.
Yes.
I think I understood the question. So what we tried. So typically, the starting point is often sort of an existing publication of academic publication for some of those attacks in many cases, and so that is true for the things in this document. So there are actual papers describing those. The documents summarize those attacks, but they don't go into all the details. So you actually have to read up on the references. You have to read through the reference to really understand the details.
Okay.
So that's the way how we did it today, because otherwise the documents grow quite a bit.
So, okay, another clarification of the threat model. The threat model.
Threat model?
Yeah.
What about it?
It doesn't not describe in his section.
So in the so this is a work in progress document. So if there's something missing, you need to point this out. But in the previous version of this document, the security BCP, we had an extensive threat model.
Okay, thank you.
So just to comment on that, we also have like for each individual attack, there should be like the overall setting and assumptions. But if something is missing, please let us know.
Yeah, and you can chime also on the list, right? So review the document, provide feedback on the list. That'll be great. Okay, awesome. Okay, anything else? Oh, sorry, Emilia.
Yeah, very quickly, the broker pattern that we just saw on screen, in the slides here, that is actually the exact same sort of architecture that was in the attack that Aaron mentioned for Sims back at the very start, where he said that it was a very complicated attack. It was basically one of these sort of architectures with a broker, and the broker was using a SIMD in order to identify itself to the upstream AS. So maybe there's a thread commonality between those that's worth exploring.
Okay, thanks, Amelia. Pedram, anything else?
No, so I guess one of the key takeaways is to like remove this brokered setting, and like the goal would be to have a separate like document, right? Like describing this in more detail and.
We'll
Yeah.
discuss this on the list.
Okay, let's have that discussion on the list, Pedram.
Sounds
Okay?
good. All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, Pedram.
Well, thank you. I'm Arndt. On behalf of my co-authors, I'm giving an update on the OAuth SPIFFE client authentication. Okay, so at a glance, the draft profiles three other specifications. RFC 7521, which is the assertion flow, 8705 for mutual TLS authentication, and the attestation-based client auth, which is going to be presented tomorrow for the workload identity token. This is all about client authentication for workload identity using SPIFFE. Yeah, SPIFFE has identifiers. They're very more or less the same as WMC identifiers. There's SPIFFE schemed URIs, and they are often used to encode infrastructure identifiers. So here's an example. You would have a trust domain, and then you have a path that is hierarchical. And in this specific example, it can be anything. You would see a location in there, specific cluster, specific service, and potentially the instance as in hierarchy. Yeah, it's deployment specific. It can be anything, but what's important is that most cases it's infrastructure identifiers. Comparing this to OAuth client identifiers, they're traditionally more like on the service level, right? You would not encode infrastructure information in there. And a common practice, for example, is to have multiple workloads act as the same client behind a load balancer, or kind of have them separate. I drew this picture here, right? You have one OAuth client and you have various services. They may be in different geolocations, availability zones. You may put one down behind the load balancer, spin one up, and you don't want users that come in through the load balancer having to reconsent every time they hit a different instance. Yeah, and for this draft, this is starting to be a thing because in the existing OAuth landscape, they are sometimes supposed to be the same. So in 8705, it says expected subject configured, and they are allowed to kind of differ, which I believe is due to the fact that the PKI environment and the OAuth environment are most of the time completely separate, and it's very difficult to change the PKI environment. Whereas 7521 and the attestation-based client auth expect the subject, like the subject of an assertion of client authentication, to be exactly the client identifier. And that is where this part breaks. I personally believe this is the reason that they tend to be either self-generated, that the claims are in control of the client and the client can just put its client ID there, and that the JWT infrastructure tends maybe a bit more closer to the OAuth infrastructure than with the PKI infrastructure. Anyway, for this draft, 8705 works, but 21 and the attestation-based client auth, yeah, there's a mismatch. Yeah, so in the current draft, we aim to release that restriction for the context of SPIFFE client authentication. So we kind of have their wording something like the subject claim or URI SAN in the case of certificates match or is associated with a recognized client identifier. We've had conversation on the mailing list. I believe there's somewhat consensus on this, but I've just wanted to hear the room and see if there's opinions on this.
In some other cases, like we've rather gone the opposite. We had very loose matching rules, and then we tightened it up and made the kind of equality match, and you go the other way around. There's a risk with that, right?
What is the risk you're seeing?
Well, if you make it fuzzy and say, oh, it kind of matches and only match subparts, like authorization decisions may be impacted. Did you think this through?
Like theoretically, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Practically, I don't see it. But
okay.
Yeah, I of course, right? Like if you loosen that up, there's all sorts of things that come with it, right? It's not an exact match anymore. Yeah.
Aaron.
So generally, I agree with your statement, Hannes, but I think in this case, it's there's a thread that keeps coming up in a lot of our discussions in this group, which is we're teasing out this idea of a client instance from a class of client. And I think this is essentially opening up the definition to allow it to identify the class, which feels to me still in the spirit of what the identifier was supposed to be. And we need to better specify what we actually mean by client instance and what things are actually managed by the instance of a client. So I think this is a okay reason to kind of open up this definition.
I hope I don't have to remind you, because like two things that come to my mind: redirect URI matching sort of like rings a bell, or if I look at BKI, there's sort of the certificates, the star, sort of the wildcard sort of matching, and so on and so on. So just saying, and I'm confident you guys looked at this and worked this out.
This is SPIFFE specific, right? So if you would look at it from a broader PKI environment, I would agree. But SPIFFE is very tightly confined and defined on how these things act together. But of course, we need to look at it. I agree.
Okay.
Christian Bormann. Yeah, I fully agree with Aaron beforehand. I think in general, in this working group, we should somehow solve this problem between client as a service and client instance, because it will be coming up more and more. It's very relevant for workloads. It's becoming more and more relevant for agent stuff. It's going to keep happening, and we need to figure out how to deal with that, in my opinion.
Nicely.
Yeah.
I precisely confined workloads, SPIFFE workloads, agents. But
yeah, in my opinion, it's a broader conversation, right? Similar, if you deploy in Kubernetes and you use OAuth to authenticate users, you have the exact same problem, right? The subject describes your infrastructure, and that's not going to be your OAuth client identifier. Yeah, and particularly when you add CIMD to it, where the client ID needs to be an HTTPS schemed URI, you're out and you're back to almost using client secrets for client authentication again. Yeah. Okay. That's the second. Oh, sorry, I'm skipping.
No, I just wanted to add to this, agreeing with Christian. From the wallet context, we see the client ID as the wallet solution, but in the attestation-based client authentication, we talk about client instances because we needed this differentiation. We basically have the same problem. And we're thinking about introducing a client instance ID as a separate parameter in the client attestation shop. We can discuss it also tomorrow. The solution that we have now in the draft is basically that we didn't want to solve this problem for the whole of OAuth in our draft. And I think that was also the feedback from the working group that we got when we discussed this the last time. So if we can find a solution for this, great. Then we can also apply it to attestation-based client authentication. I just wanted to explain why it is as it is right now.
This is Frederick. So I agree that it's fine in the spiffy situation. The problem I have with this is that it requires you to add language into other drafts or other specs that relaxes the restriction. So for instance, in attestation-based client authentication, you would have to say something like, okay, well, basically what you write here, right? And only then in spiffy, though, you then constrain it to something specific. And this means that, I mean, the suggested language that you wrote, and I know that's just a random suggestion, but in the issue in attestation-based client authentication basically says, oh, the AS needs to have some mapping. And that then immediately reads as, you know, to naive people, you can do whatever you want, which is exactly what we want to avoid. So I think the problem is not that you're doing it in spiffy, the problem is that it requires normative changes in other specifications that open things up that we don't want to open up.
I agree. However, just a quick follow-up thing on this. This is already in 8705. The clear mapping is already there, loosened up. Right? Yeah.
George.
Yeah, so the other piece that comes to mind here is that it's creating this undefined way of determining what the correct set is. And if you have a geo-distributed environment, how do you keep that correct set in sync? So there's a whole bunch of other complexities that come when you start creating these sets of things that kind of represent the same thing that I think we have to be really careful about just adding it in there, because people will not likely do it correctly.
Yeah, thank you, because that introduces my next slide. Yeah, and that is actually how do you map a spiffy ID to a client ID? And in this example, same as before, you have the region, cluster, service, and instance encoded in the spiffy ID as an example. And there's multiple opinions and approaches to actually define that policy on how to actually agree on that mapping. So for example, there's direct mapping to say I put a list of spiffy IDs in, associate them with the client, and every time I scale out, I have a new instance coming up, I need to update my client. The other thing that is currently in the draft is an open-ended prefix mapping, where you can actually wildcard the end away, for example, the instance. However, every time you spin up a new cluster or deploy into a different geolocation, you have to update the client. And then last but not least is also kind of to say path segmented wildcards, where you say in this specific segment, I'm adding a wildcard. But as you said, George, right, like it gets open-ended, people may implement it differently. Yeah, it's a thing. I think I wanted to hear opinions on this slide. Yeah, I think.
Pam. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Pam Dingle from Microsoft. Justin mentioned enumeration attacks, or enumeration in general that might not be an attack. And that, have you considered the fact that if you're using this spiffy ID, for example, to federate across from one platform provider to another platform provider, that then that destination platform provider learns perhaps information about how big the competitors' regions or clusters for that customer might be?
I agree. If you put all that information into CIMD, then you get to know and to learn a lot about the infrastructure. Okay. Yeah, the road ahead. Please continue to review and provide feedback. We had a couple of discussions yesterday and the day prior on it, and we continue to receive issues. So please keep that up. There's a dependency with the workload identity token, which is defined in WIMC, that is currently in working group last call. So we are kind of waiting for that to finalize before we can move this work further. And that sort of mapping semantics, client ID versus client instance, is so far the last remaining big item, and we'll continue to work on that.
Okay.
Andrew?
Andrew.
Just a quick comment. I don't have strong feelings on how to solve this. It sounds like there's multiple solutions, and I kind of need to look at the different drafts involved. But I do think this is a problem that we need to think about solving. I do see this scenario with customers frequently.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I think Yaroslav is next, right?
Okay. Right. Hello, everyone. Yaroslav here. On behalf of a group of co-authors, I would like to present Transaction Authorization Challenge proposal. But first, thanks, chairs, to accommodating my personal circumstances and adjusting schedule so that I could present today.
We are happy to help.
Thanks. Right. So what is it about? What's the core use case we are trying to solve here? One of arguably missing building blocks of using existing set of OAuth, WIMC, and other technologies for agentic AI is human in the loop. There are some proprietary solutions out there, but for step-up authorization, that is ability of protected resource to challenge a specific transaction, get confirmation from the human that this transaction indeed should be going through, we couldn't really locate any kind of standard technology. So this is what this proposal is ultimately designed to address. So the setup is we have a client that is human-driven, that has relationships with authorization server that is running 0 or more agents. So it could be one agent, could be no agents, could be many agents in the chain, and those agents communicating with protected resource. So client is obtaining access token from the AS and then granting agents to perform some operations by providing them with this access token. And then agents are using access token to authorize themselves at the protected resource. And one of the challenges with agentic AI, as we all know, they are mysterious and they have sometimes intrusive thoughts, such as should I drop the database? Sometimes they behave somewhat unpredictably. And these intrusive thoughts, for some reasons, in the agents can take over and they result in actions. So they can say to the protected resource, I would like to drop the database, or some other potentially dangerous activity, which could be in scope of authorization that was provided to the agent. What we're trying to address here is to provide a mechanism for protected resource to challenge this request, to challenge this transaction based on certain heuristics or baselining or its own AI or some other trigger. Protected resource could say that I better confirm this. I don't really trust this particular request, even though it is authenticated and authorized. This is still a risky operation. So we define transaction authorization request that protected resource could generate. It's a JOT that is signed by a protected resource. Agents could look into that JOT, but because it is signed, they cannot modify it. They cannot hallucinate it. So they could either potentially drop it, so back off, figure out that, yes, this is something that we shouldn't have asked for, or they could relate to the client. The client could take a look at this request, will either again decide that this request should not go forwards. We don't want to drop the database. That was some kind of hallucination malfunction of the agent. But because humans are bad at clicking buttons, at giving their consent, we are proposing that this transaction authorization request should be then relayed to authorization server, which would make an ultimate decision, could potentially just automatically approve it, or potentially consult with approving party, or go into some form of deployment-specific authorization process to generate a new access token that would be transaction-specific and authorize this challenged transaction. So there are a few specific steps that we're going through. Keep in mind, this is individual 0.0 draft, so I don't want to spend way too much time on nuts and bolts of all the details. We'll iron them out as we go. But the idea that we first have defined a discovery mechanism. The discovery mechanism is currently defined as a capability signal in HTTP request header that is signaled by the agent that is interacting with a protected resource, because it needs to be aware, it needs to be compatible with transaction authorization requests. Otherwise, if it's not, then it will not be able to react to them and relay them correctly. And so it cannot be just client metadata, because everyone in authorization chain needs to support this capability. Then challenge, it's up to protected resource to decide what to challenge under which conditions. As I mentioned, the challenge is signed so that agents and clients cannot modify it by mistake or malicious intent or whatever, or hallucinate it. There are a few relatively boring claims that are included there that we would all expect, and there are some exciting claims that are included. TXN, which is transaction identifier. For the specification perspective, it's opaque string, but identifies a specific transaction to be authorized. Authorization details are reason, which is human readable string, and reason URI optional claim that would allow a client to present it in a web browser if there is some more explanation required why is this being challenged. And then finally, actor claim that would provide identifier of agent that is responsible for this action. So in sophisticated environments where you have multiple agents creating another agents, would be good to understand which one is actually malfunctioning. So we have an example of this transaction challenge, again, JOT with all those claims that I've just listed. And then authorization server validates and processes the challenge, may approve immediately if it feels like it, may delay approval, may involve step-up authentication. So maybe it's sending some kind of outbound push notification to the client to, again, confirm identity, could potentially involve external parties. So if, for example, an engineer wants to drop the production database, maybe some kind of manager should approve that, not just an engineer, even if engineer technically somehow is authorized for such a destructive action. There is a certain flow that we've proposed, deferred flow for interaction between client and authorization server that allows authorization server to defer generation decision, potential generation of minting of new access token, and providing to the client information about how often should authorization server be pinged or, well, verified status if this is approved or not yet, depending on the interactions with external approved party. And if it's approved, authorization server means new access token that includes transaction identifier from the transaction challenge. So when it arrives at the protected resource, it would know that this is authorized and this is that transaction that this authorization is for. So there was a bit of feedback. The few folks identified that there is overlap with few other proposals, not like complete overlap, but there are certain building blocks that we could reuse. So we're planning to collaborate with proponents of other solutions to identify those building blocks that could be generalized and reused, and also maybe perhaps more cleanly define scope in those proposals that do overlap. So for example, there is a separate proposal for deferred token response. Clearly, we don't need to create our own custom deferred solution if there is common pattern that we could follow. And then there is also a plan to strengthen key binding and delegation properties. So, there is quite a queue.
Walk the queue first, and then Peter.
Hi, this is Peter. I have two questions, actually. Number one is that I thought that in this IETF, we're not going to discuss specific proposals. We're going to discuss use cases. I thought we were going to discuss use cases, but I can let it slide. The next question is that, can you go back to the flow, the first page? My question is, so your red arrows, why it has to be initiated from the protected resource side? Is it okay for the agent to directly initiate a request?
Because protected resource is the one that is challenging the transaction. So it's protected resource that finds the transaction risky and would like step up authorization.
I can think about the number of round trips and the lags that may, and or the number of the requests that may keep the client, the users bothered. I'm thinking that the request could be initiated from the agent's side when it's deciding to access some kind of protected resource. Should that be initiate some requests back to the client first for authorizations?
I'm not really
before
sure
you
I
actually
understand
access the
question.
protected resource.
Sorry, who should be initiating the
agent
if it's
on
not
on your diagram. The agent on your diagram,
yes,
when it's deciding to access some protected resource,
right?
Should it look for client's authorization or approval before it actually tries to do the drop the database thing?
Well, yes, if it doesn't have an access token that could grant access to protected resource, it will not be able to make the first transactions in the first place. The proposal is to give protected resource an ability to challenge a specific transaction that falls within the scope of already existing access token.
Okay.
If access token doesn't exist in the first place, then that's not what this proposal is about.
Time out. Okay. So I'm going to stop this discussion and I'm going to stop, like you finished the presentation, right?
Yep.
So we're going to give the agent like the other presentations and then we can go back to this discussion. Okay. So I'm going to drain the queue. Like we're not going to give the queue and like, please drop from the queue right now and we will come back later to discuss all this topic. Okay.
Yeah, it looks like we already having the discussion ahead of the actual agenda item discussion. So wasn't meant to be that way. Yeah. We'll fix it.
Yeah, Dick.
Good afternoon. I'm going to talk about just one gap around OAuth. OAuth is the workhorse. It's the most popular workhorse for solving authorization, just like the Ford F-150s. What? Sit on?
You're too tall for the microphone. Is that better?
Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay. I have to start over? Can I just keep going?
Keep going.
Okay. OAuth's the workhorse for, it's a tool everybody goes to for authorization things. That's, just like the Ford F-150 is the best-selling vehicle in America for all the Europeans here. Haven't explained that. Other presenters are going to present a bunch of the gaps. I'm just going to focus on one gap, which is how do we enable self-driving software? So software has changed. I think we all know that. Software is operating very differently. It's no longer deterministic. And so when resources, what resources an agent needs is now often determined at runtime, and what access the agent needs is often determined at runtime as well. And the authorization still in almost all these models is deterministic. But irreversible actions, work of consequence, we don't trust agents, right? Right now, nobody enables delete database as a tool for the agent, or anybody that read news and saw a table get deleted that was production has disabled that functionality, thinking, I don't want that to happen to me. And so delete that database, we don't want to enable it to happen, right? And so, but if we were deleting, we do at times though want to delete a database, right? So if it's a scratch copy, if we're creating a database, deleting a database, creating a database, deleting a database, we do testing and we do things like that's all fine. But if that's a production database that we've been running, it's got millions of records in it, that's horrible. But if it's actually that production database and it's after we've verified a whole migration, and so we expect that to actually happen, then that's okay, right? So same database, different things, like all of this is very dependent on the context of what it is, right? The Saskatchewan's fine, production, just being production is catastrophic, unless of course it was part of a whole larger picture around what's happening. And so no scope separates these types of actions, right? We're really dependent on the context, right? The mechanisms we had before around what's allowed to happen, not allowed to happen, are no longer available, particularly in a dynamic world where we're trying to make these decisions. It's that context. And so, in that context, it's like, what's the mission? What are we trying to set out to do, right? What else has happened, right? And so in this one for deleting the production database, right? It's like, well, the migration's already happened, right? We've already done this. And so now it is okay to delete that database. And so today, right, we want to have a human make that call. We want to flow all that back to a human, but if a human can make the call, so could AI. And so AI making these decisions of consequence is happening already in self-driving cars. And so I'm using that as an analogy, which of course isn't perfect, for self-driving software. So, there's an artificial brain making decisions of consequence in these self-driving cars, right? So we have been doing these things, having separate brains that are making decisions that are things of consequence in a non-deterministic world. And so it's not the agent that's doing the work, it's a separate agent that's evaluating that context, the governance agent. And so in a self-driving car, we need the destination, we need inputs, we need control for that brain to make all that decision. And so in self-driving software, I say, well, we need a mission, we need context, we need control, right? We need to have all of that stuff together so we can do it. And so I'm saying that's a gap. That's where we want to get to as self-driving software. And the question for the working group is, do we do that on the Ford F-150 with mechanical linkage and all the stuff we've been building and that was designed for something else, or do we start with a different platform, the battery electric vehicle, the Rivian, and AOTH? I have a side meeting on AOTH in the room next door after this meeting.
Okay, Jeff. So yeah, Jeff. Yeah. So we're gonna have that discussion at the end of the presentation, 3 presentations, okay?
I got 10 minutes, not 5, right?
Go fast.
Hi, I'm Mike Jones.
Did you see Dick?
Yeah, Dick was fast. See Dick run. I'm going to talk about some interesting work I'm doing with Skyfire and some co-authors from Akamai, Experian, Okta, and Ori. So we're trying to enable agentic commerce on the actual web we have and with the APIs we already have. And that's the goal informing all of what follows. So in this presentation, I will derive information that we've learned and experiences from building this out, and then talk about, well, what does this mean for OAuth, and what did we have to build it on top of OAuth, the F-150 of the identity world? That was your joke, Dick. So what properties do we want first, before I get into the gaps? We want parties involved in the interactions to be able to decide whether to let an agent through, just like they would let you through, as opposed to blocking an agent. We want to eliminate for the agents working for you the "are you human" tests, which they're going to fail. We want to be able to use agentic access to website and APIs without having to set up an account at every place you go. It should just be seamless. And of course, standards are a necessity. I've made my living off of that, but it's what enables open cooperation and open ecosystems. So the next section, I'm going to talk about the gaps that we've learned about by building a real system. So the first gap is being able to represent information about the human being or organization that's authorizing the access of the agent on its behalf along the way. And this would end up being used, or is in our case, used by content distribution networks, fraud managers, bot managers, all these infrastructure players, as well as the identity systems that we're familiar with. We want to enable your agent to get the same access that you would get as a human without you having to do it yourself. So one of the gaps then is, how do you identify the person or the organization that is authorizing the agent's access? And we're actually being agnostic about that. We're not saying we must define the identity representation. We recognize that that's an unsettled piece of work, which is itself a gap that, you might use a SPIFFE identifier, a SIMD URL. You might use a lot of things, but you still want to convey them and have that be recognized. We're also enabling payments. That's not the focus of this working group, but that's a gap. Then there's 3 different sets of claims. This is informed by some work with Experian that has a lot of information that's used to identify fraud and whatnot. So one of the interesting things is, I wrote with some of you a draft 9 years ago to list authentication methods. Well, it turns out we've done a lot as an industry in the last 9 years. There's a bunch of new authentication methods. There's passkeys. Those didn't exist. There's facial recognition with liveness check. There's a whole bunch of authentication methods we don't have representations for. We have a draft for that. Another gap is identifying how the person was proofed. We have a draft for that. There's anti-money laundering, which again, in finance and some of these use cases, that matters. We don't have a claim for that yet. We need a token or a representation for this, and we need ways of conveying this. Where the clicker is really stochastic. I may at this point, yeah. So in Shenzhen 4 months ago, Ecker asked everyone, and now I'll do my best Ecker. Do you have a bunch of people who want to interoperably use your thing, in which case you need a standard? Or are you just presenting your project? In which case, why are you here? And a lot of people were unprepared for this question. And indeed, you used a different version of that question when introducing our session. I'm here partly happy to be here because we are doing this work with a whole bunch of other people, and I won't belabor that. You can follow the URL next.
Okay.
So the main artifact that we have is something called a KYA token, KYA pay token, know your agent. It's a JOT. I know some things about JOTs. We carry claims about the things above.
So we want to give mailing a chance also.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you wrap up here?
Yeah, let's go to the next to last slide because my clicker stopped working. So we have a bunch of specs filling these gaps to a point that George Fletcher made. Most of these pieces of functionality are independently useful. So for instance, the AMR claims, the KYA pay token might be used with other systems. We do want to collaborate with other people. Last slide. So you can contact me. I'm going to do the normal OAuth thing, though, and ask, are there people willing to read some of these drafts? I'm not asking you to take agenda time, but if you're willing to read them, go to the chat and say that you're willing to, and I'll work with you. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Okay, Meiling. Give it a shot and see if it works. Try it. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Okay, I'm the last one for the presentation. It's about the core use case and gap analysis for AI agents. And the URL here is our individual draft, and second line is the GitHub repo here. And we also have several issues haven't been solved, and welcome the experts to help us to make it clear. Okay, next. Okay, our use case have divided into three parts. The first is the personal and the consumer scenarios. We almost have 5 use cases here. Okay, the first use case is for the personal digital assistant. Now it's very popular now. So the scenario is very simple, so I don't explain it in more detail. So we come to the second is the authorization requirements. So it need to intend to permission mapping and translate the abstract goal into specific, mineral, just-in-time permissions dynamically. And second is interactive and loops is like human in loop. And the third is task level revocation. Enable one-click revocation of all permissions tied to a single task context. So the gap length is that the paradigm mismatched, and also no interactive follow standards, and also we need the great revocation here. And the second is for our smart home and automation, although some experts comment that it has been slowed. But I also list the use case here. So the current gaps is that in smart home and automation scenario, there is really have a scope explosion. So all consent screens become unusable when presenting thousands of device-specific codes to users. And second is missing policy context. And it also have no bug revocation standard. It's because maybe it's like a group. No, we cannot revocate one by one. So. And the use case 3 is for agent as users representative to third-party tools. So the requirements is here. Agent user distinction. Which one is user? I mean the human beings, and which one is agent? Who delegate the task to which agent? And second is that agentic specific policies apply stricter rate limits to codes to agents without impacting human user experience. And set the requirements that constrained delegation, grant limited scope permission instead of full use access. So the gap here is that no standard agent in identity, maybe like SPIF ID and something like that can do that, but I'm not sure. And second is binary scope limitation. Yes or no? Oh, is too narrow. And third is set gap is that to confuse the deputy program. Okay, I will more quick. And use case 4 is agent accessing all our resources as users proxy. Okay, the gap here is that architecture misalignment and missing intent to permission breach and also risk of over authorization. Use case 5 is the first connection to a service with no pre-authorization channel. Is from okay, I don't remember his name. So the authorization here is that they need a pre-channel last bootstrapping and the user initiated and the constraint and also revocable by design is have touched in other use case. So the gap analysis is also have devices authorization follows still accepts a human accessible verification page access exists, which is not true for many headless or isolated service. And second is missing standard for cold start and insecure anti-patterns. The second part is for enterprise and the business process scenarios. So use case 6 is for complex business process automation and like an insure client processing. It needs invoke agent, verification agent, and adjustification agent or payout agent. Each step depends on the secure handoff of the prior agent's output. So the gap length here is no native multi-hop support. And the second is missing context standardization.
So, Millie, I see that you still have about.
Oh no, this is not the last one. It's for
okay, perfect.
Okay, I will.
We want to just get to that discussion level. You don't have to be exhaustive with all the use cases, right? So we want to be able to get that discussion with the work group, right? So.
Okay. So I will ignore the 3 use case and do a summary of the common requirements here. Finally, we think there are 5 requirements here. Is first the dynamic scope and intent expression. Second is flexible and diverse interaction methods. And the third is native agent and the group identity support. The fourth is secure multi-hop and cross-domain delegation. The last is dynamic lifestyle and advanced relocation. As a response to Jeff's comments that we have to analyze the existing author extensions for agent authorization, which we can use as the broad building blocks, which we need to do the optimization. And the first is RAR. So we know it's useful, but the gap here is that static by design, unable to natively adapt to the dynamic deterministic actions of autonomous agent. And also DPOP. The gap is that assumes fixed key pairs, making it incompatible with agent mitigation or dynamic sub-agent creation. And third is for transaction tokens. The design for trusted internal networks not suitable for untrusted third-party agent interactions. And the fourth is for the CIMD. So the gap lock is lock of agent context, public URI dependency, and missing delegation trustability. And I list 3 questions here. The first one is, do we think we know there are many use cases for AI agents, and we do the authorization use case and gap analysis is useful or is or not? And second is, are there any unique new use case that need to be added? Is that all? And the requirements have covered all the new use case. And third is that if we think the authorization use case is useful, do we need to quickly polish the use case? Maybe we can join the weekly online meetings to polish the use case to help other solutions to develop.
Okay, thank you. So can I get Mike and Dick here at the front? And we want to have a discussion, but I just want to remind everyone that this is just the beginning of the discussion, and we are, like Hannes and I were chatting about this, we're thinking about scheduling an interim meeting to continue this discussion. So, but hopefully that gives you a flavor of what people are thinking here, and we want to get the feedback from the community here.
But as you've seen from even those 3 presentations, the authors or the presenters believe that there are a number of gaps from like expressing the mission intent all the way to sort of very specific details that Mike presented on AMR, and you brought up many gaps as well. So we probably have to discuss them a little bit more. Or we will have to discuss them a little bit more because there's almost too many things that you brought forward. Those who are previously in the queue, I encourage you to join again because I'm sure your question is still unanswered by now. So don't be shy, and let's get it going. Dabeng.
Dabeng from Alibaba Group. So I have a comments to the KYA pay draft to Mac. So I think the proposal is very interesting. I can see it could bring value to the e-commerce ecosystem very much. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to have a couple of clarification questions. First is, for example, if we, as an e-commerce platform, we see a KYA token come in, and it says that the users already authorized one agent to do something for him. So how can we trust the users is some valid user in our platform? How can we do the authentication for the user? Yeah.
The token is signed by a token issuer, and there's open questions about what token issuers you want to trust. And I understand that, but assuming it's signed by a token issuer that you trust.
So sorry, I'm gonna stop this. Like, we're not talking about details here and how, like, this is way too detailed. Let's talk about the gaps and the use cases that we're like trying to solve.
I will, comment on that part too. So from those presentations, I do see there are gaps for OAuth in the agentic scenario. So first, as Mac's presentation also mentioned, is about how to do the user agent delegation, and especially for the cases that is the users. First, it needs users authorization, and secondly, need for us, for example, like example, e-commerce platform, we need always a way for the user's consent or user's authentication. So that part I think is useful. Secondly,
but let me jump on that one. That's something we do today already. Right. Like if you replace the word agent with,
I'm talking about
with
some
client, we do that.
A canonimus mechanism, maybe not the synchronous one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Second, I want to.
Sorry, we have a long list of people, so thank you.
Keep it short.
Yeah, keep it short, please. Jonathan.
Jonathan Rosenberg. There's a use case I'm interested in. I published a draft on it before Madrid. Check, CHEQ. The use case is, I think, very interesting. The user is communicating with an agent, an AI agent with one provider, let's say a travel agent, like a travel booking system, and it's going to book a complicated trip on my behalf. So I want to give it access to my United Airlines, my Hilton Hotels, my Delta Airlines, what have you. And I tell it to go book me a wonderful vacation. However, it's going to spend money if it ends up booking a flight on United, for example, and I tell it, I don't like first class, it's too expensive, and it goes and it hits the booking API on United, and it books me a first class ticket. That's not refundable. That's bad. In this case, I want to allow it to access United, but I want a human in the loop approval for the specific details that it's going to invoke in a way that it is hallucination safe. So I'm not relying on the LLM in any way. 100% guarantee the tool call that it makes, which is book flight, is done. I'm not sure. I honestly am not sure whether this use case is addressed by any of the three. I've been trying to read, and it's still not clear. But that's the use case I'm interested in. There's a bunch more.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Go ahead, Dave.
That use case I gave as a talk at AOTH night in San Francisco 3 weeks ago, and there's a video online of that, which is I want to go and have an agent book me a trip to Japan and book all the stuff.
Everyone loves travel agent use cases, yes.
Yeah. And which is why I view, like, I want that travel agent to actually do all the booking, which is why we, in the AOTH architecture, you have a separation between the governance agent that makes that decision that's independent of the mission agent that's trying to book.
But does I'll ask it in the session later if that's more appropriate, but does the AOTH specs you've written cover a human in the loop at the time of API call, human in the loop approval or not? I thought it actually said it's not covering that use case.
You could have a human. We can talk about it more in the AOTH session.
That's the use case I'm interested in. If anyone else is interested in that,
those are good use cases. Some of our examples follow flows like that.
Yeah, I think it can aid to the open issues.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Peter.
Speaking of, as an author of the use case document, and we have run several site meetings, actually we have a real use case of a security incident response. So in our cases, an operator usually handles security probes and response systems from various vendors. So that's very heterogeneous. So when there's a response, usually the probe detects it and the SOC analyzes it and the PEP will enforce it. So my message is, number one, of the requirements that our workflow, certain workflows requires cross-domain user stories and workflows. And resources in different domains must coordinate. So that's number one requirement. Number two is that human in the loop may has its limitations because it may trigger your fatigue in operation. It may trigger, it may makes the user being bothered many times. So what I'm thinking is that the requirements also in the document is a batch authorization or intent based authorization that actually authorizes a batch of authorizations at the same time to complete the work. So that's why I asked the question for yourself. So those are the two, one use case, two requirements. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Rashid.
In the workflow, when we have a client,
get closer to the mic.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, and when we have the clients and agents and the origin. So when the agent act, for instance, to delete a database or something, or that's how the intermediary know this action from agent. This is the, so in use case,
like
in the workflow, that's
I think these are a little bit more detailed. We're talking about use cases for now. So when we get to those details, maybe in the future, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks, Rashid.
Hi, Authorization.
Go ahead.
So
go ahead.
Yes, the question is that I do see a snippet on interactive consent in the use cases that you show, but I do not see any section on user preference. For example, I want to say that you can save my data, like through my agent, you can save my data on your third-party agent, but do not give to any other agent, things like that. Is there any intention to expand the use cases for that? I can give more examples of why user preference is important if you like.
Sorry, I don't get
Use cases on user preferences.
for what?
User preference.
User preference.
Yeah.
Okay. To these questions, I'm not so clear about the user profiles, I think, but
I mean, to the extent that we talked about the travel booking use case, it's certainly the case that there's going to be application-specific preference databases, and whether I want to book United or Delta
Context.
and there's a lot of contextual stuff, and it's going to be real.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
whether it's in our protocols or at the application layer is yet to be decided.
Yep. Joseph. Joseph Salloway? No? Where's Joseph? Okay. Okay, no worries. We're out of time, but Yaron, quickly.
Yeah. This has to do with Yaroslav's draft and mine. I think part of the solution would be some consent negotiation, which would require RAR metadata, so it can be as fine-grained as a specific transaction or action. Sometimes that's too fine-grained and causes a lot of friction. So me and some others think there will be maybe some more high-level negotiation of guardrails that define the interaction and can be agreed upon. So that requires metadata in order to discuss and have a back and forth until, based on some published schema representing a domain-specific taxonomy, an agent or LLM can fill it and then put it up for approval. And still, in some points, I think there will be this step-up pattern that Yaroslav showed, and I'm speaking about tomorrow, where we both agree that the resource server that enforces RAR can also be a good point of saying that's the missing piece, that's the missing shape. If you'll step up on that, I'm going to allow you the next thing, so make things that are remediable.
Yeah, so obviously a start of the conversation, not the end. The impression I get is like we are all over the map here. Like I almost see no overlap in like from the different presentations. Like it's almost like huge, and it's like a wish list to Santa Claus on what we all want to have. So it's going to be interesting to work this out. I'm sure we will succeed. But yeah, I'm curious where we end up in the, at the end of the day. But yeah, with that, I'm looking forward to the next meeting and to continue that conversation.
Yeah, and look for us to schedule an interim on this topic, okay? Thank you all, appreciate it. See you
Thank
tomorrow.
you.
Thank you, but I'm not quite sure.